I'm here with Nicholas Jarecki, the writer-director of Crisis, which came out a little more than a month ago, I think, right? And is now available on demand. It is a very complex thriller about the drug industry, illicit and so-called above bar, with three really cool intersecting stories that paint a picture of the modern opioid crisis. And we're going to talk about that today. So, Nick, thank you very much for joining us.
Ian, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, I want to talk to you about this. I'm fascinated by the based on a true story, or as your film opens, inspired by true events stories. Uh, were there were you reading headlines? Did something grab you and say, "Oh, this could make a cool movie"? Was there a particular, like a magazine article or something you'd heard about that caused you to dig in deep and weave this narrative together? How did you get involved in writing this film?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back a long way. I was thinking about where it came from, and I think it did start with personal experiences. These films often do. When I was a young man, I had a friend who got in trouble with opioids, and he passed away. It was very confusing to us because he was from a good family, good education. How did this happen? And it started with pills, and then it ultimately graduated into heroin abuse, and then it was all over. You know, what can you do in those situations except you grieve, you move on, and you just go, I don't know. But about I'd made arbitrage, and I was thinking about what to do next, and I had I had thought at the time, I had the brief notions of an idea of like what about something about pills? What about pills? But I didn't really understand the topic. Um, and I was never a pill guy, so I didn't get it. Uh, but then about 5 years ago, there was a whole lot of information that started to come out about pharmaceutical companies and their behavior with regards to opioids. And There was a wonderful series of articles in the Los Angeles Times, and I actually was turned on to them by I had some tinnitus or something, so I went to see my audiologist, who I modeled the character after him in this film, and he said, I said, I'm thinking about doing something about opioids. And he said, oh, they cause hearing loss. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, you should read. There's some great stuff in the LA Times. So I started reading the LA Times, and I called the reporters and I said, hey, will you talk to me? And wonderful woman, Lisa Girion, did. And so she started to share with me all this information. We met up a bunch of times about internal documents from pharmaceutical companies that the Times had been able to put together. And the question was, these pills that were being prescribed and being heavily prescribed and marketed, were they safe? Were they safe within the prescribing window? And indeed, there was a lot of research that showed perhaps they were not. And perhaps they were far more addictive than the manufacturers were advertising. And of course, those studies were disputed, but it got me going. And then Lisa introduced me to Steve Opferman, who was this wonderful retired LA sheriff who ran the Prescription Narcotics Task Force. And he had busted many of the real cartels on which this film is modeled. So he started to take me around to what's called a pill mill, as we get into in the film, where pills are illicitly diverted from the legitimate market to the black market. And then, he'd bring me the case files, and we would sit and look at, okay, this cartel did this, and this was in the Armenian community in Los Angeles, so this was in another community, and how they set up these false storefronts. And so I started consuming all of this. And at the same time, the film opens up with this boy crossing the border from Canada with a suitcase full of pills. And that was a true story that had just happened as I was starting to write the film. There was a kid busted going across the border. So I thought, wow, this really is pretty timely. And the New York Times back then, before the pandemic, was printing articles about the opioid epidemic every day. It went away, but the epidemic didn't go away. I just read an article, in fact, that deaths are at their highest level ever from opioid abuse during the pandemic. But I just thought, this is great. topic for a film, and something that really deserves to be explored. And I hadn't seen anything coming out of Hollywood that was addressing this. So that's where it began. And then I just, as you do, you get into it and you start working on a script, and little by little the characters come to life.
Yeah, and that covers, I think, all of the three principles in terms of the characters. You've got the DEA agent played by Armie Hammer. You've got Evangeline Lily's single mom recovering addict whose son is mixed up in, sort of has a tenuous relationship to the kid crossing the border that you mentioned. I'm going to try and keep this spoiler free. And then you've got Gary Oldman's college professor who is also doing deep research for a major pharmaceutical company. All fascinating kind of points of intersection. And I wonder, as you dug into this, did you run into any blocks? Was there anybody who was unwilling to talk to you? How much did you have to fill in with sort of ideas about, filling in your own gaps to create a dramatic story?
Well, so these you always try to make the characters as real as possible. So I mean, these characters were inspired by people I knew. So I knew I knew a teacher that brought me into the university world a bit. And then I had read about certain scientists that had been discredited by but not pharmaceutical company, by chemical companies. And so that kind of informed that story. Evangeline's character, that was sort of based on something from my own family, where I had a family member whose son was murdered. And she used to go and drive by the guy's house before he was brought to justice, found out who he was, and sit out there and wait. And I thought, what is she waiting to do? This is 40, 50 years ago. I would hear the story growing up. And then Armie's character, I mean, I certainly modeled on Steve, on Offerman, the undercover detective. But then it was a question of getting deeper into the research, especially in the pharmaceutical side. I knew people in the biotech industry and in the pharma industry. So I would meet with them and go in and see the real labs and stuff like that. And you just get a sense, you get a rhythm for how the people speak, and how they think, the world that they're operating in. I mean, I love those films, Michael Mann, Heat, or The Insider, or stuff for Billy Friedkin. You feel like they lived in it.
Yeah.
It has a certain suit of clothing. It feels authentic, even if it's fake. It still feels authentic. And so I liked steeping it in the research, and then I feel like that bleeds into its presentation.
Definitely. It's watching the movie, I got a real sense that there's these wonderful little vignettes. You're not holding our hands as far as like, what do these characters' complete backstory? What's their deal? We're dropping in on them. They're, spliced together to create this three-part story. But a lot is left to the audience to kind of infer, particularly with Armie Hammer's character, the DEA agent, and he's obsessed with bringing down this cartel, which happens to be dealing in the new drug of fentanyl. It's sort of evolving from the oxy market into fentanyl, which is much more deadly and much more addictive. But you find out that he's got some real deep-seated reasons for wanting to do what he does. Now, as far as your filmography, I've noticed in Arbitrage, in Crisis, and even in The Informers, which I know you co-adapted with Bret Easton Ellis, there's a theme of very powerful men and the walls kind of closing in on them, whether that's sort of like Hollywood, movie studio executives or financiers, or in this case, people working for Big Pharma or the ones who are being affected by Big Pharma. I notice you keep coming back to this theme, not just saying you repeat yourself, but it feels like you're constantly trying to explore and get at some underlying truth there in society. Is that the case, or do you just find these kind of things fascinating and dramatically compelling?
No, I mean, certainly it's been said that every director just makes the same movie over and over again in different ways. I don't think that's quite true, but there are themes that you're interested in. For me, it's power and money in society, and its corruptive influence. I mean, that is a very it's a broad theme, but it's an eternal theme. Whether you're going back to Plutarch or whoever. arbitrage, we dealt with a king who is corrupt, or who has become corrupted, and as pressure is applied to him, it starts to reveal who he is. In The Informers, I think we dealt with characters who were all touched by a corrupt society, and so it bled into their daily bread, it created a kind of malaise and a searching in them. And here in this film, I framed it a little bit differently, in the sense that the protagonists are more of a everyday stature, of the middle class or of the upper middle class. So they're not necessarily powerful people, but they've got to come up against this powerful machine, driven by profit and driven by capital, which often can be unfeeling if it's sort of not checked out, monitored. So I like seeing, you speak of the walls closing in. I mean, that's really the purpose of drama, isn't it? To put a character in extremis and then to try to get to what's there inside. Because I do think these themes are universal, and I think the power of a good drama or a good thriller is to have you in the shoes of the people that you're watching and say, oh my God, don't go there now. So the more pressure you can put on them, the more I think you create a relatable predicament to the viewer. And so these are certain techniques, or tricks maybe that I have up my sleeve, but they're also the arenas that I like to look at. And I like to look at some type of a dysfunction and to say, what's causing that dysfunction? How do we feel about it? And do we want to blame the individual, or do we want to blame the society? Because I think there's more to be learned in looking at the society, because that's something we could do something about.
That's what's interesting about your three protagonists in this film in particular, is they are trying to do the right thing, but they are also inherently corrupt in some way. Not necessarily in a malicious or talking down sort of sense, but Evangeline Lily's character is a former drug addict who goes on a personal crusade to sort of well, I want to
Right or
stay away
wrong.
from. To right or wrong. I want to stay away from spoilers here. You've got Gary Oldman, who is the college professor / researcher who, when he sort of grows a conscience, he has it thrown back in his face that he's been doing similar research for decades without raising so much of a fuss because the money is good and the endowments are great. And Armie Hammer's character, he's deep undercover, so he's had to do some unsavory things in the pursuit of justice. So was there ever any temptation to have a sort of a forthright, non-morally gray protagonist in this, or is that sort of part of your thesis that you can't live in this world, either the world of drugs or just in the world in general, without being tainted in some way?
Well, I think we want. They speak of when you're writing, that you want to try to have a round character as opposed to a flat character. So you see certain films that are social issue films or up for Oscar Gold or whatever, and sometimes you feel that they tell you things that you knew already. Like you go to the theater, you go watch the movie, and they go at the end, they go like, oh, and you know what, women are people too. Like, oh, I actually knew that already. I knew that before I came to. Did I really need to watch 2 hours to tell me women were people too? I kind of already knew that. So, I don't. I like more to present people with all their complexity and all their foibles. Evangeline, she. I think she gives a great performance in this movie as the architect, as the mother, and she was really excited to lose her temper and to lash out at people and to not play it safe at all. And I think that why? I mean, that's real life, isn't it? I mean, we aren't always at our best, and we all kind of harbor secret desires, or have committed some type of crime somewhere, whether it was on our taxes or whatever. I didn't do anything wrong on my taxes, by the way. Uh, and but do you take that? If somebody leaves the money on the counter, and do you take it? And what if they're rich? And you say, oh, well, he won't miss it. So so I like these characters that are a little more conflicted, and I think they're fun to watch. And then especially to see if they can do something noble. Um, as I love Bogart, I love the movies of the '40s, and I love that character. He's always in the back, he's smoking a cigarette, and he's in the back of the boxing gym, and they want the guy to throw the fight, and he's kind of going along with it, going along with But then by the end of the movie, you go, oh my God, okay, he couldn't. That was a bridge too far. He had to finally stand up and do the right thing, and I like that ethos of film. It's a bit of a noir trope, but one that's always very satisfying to me. So I thought this was an opportunity to play in that arena, and to show this kind of David and Goliath story, but with people who were a little more real, a little more rough around the edges, who had sins of the past or things that were wrong with them.
Kind of a sidebar to that is with Evangeline Lilly's character in particular, she kind of goes on this avenging angel quest, which we've seen in hundreds of movies. What I liked about Crisis is that she is presented as someone who she is an architect and a former drug user, who decides to take law into her own hands, but she doesn't immediately become super skilled or an assassin or something. She gets her ass handed to her in a couple of key moments. Things end up working out as they do, but it's nice to see a truly vulnerable character who is vulnerable even in the moments where they're being strong, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of tone to an extent. There are some great vigilante movies that you see, whether it's Dirty Harry or whether it's like even Peppermint or something with. I saw one I actually quite liked recently, The Rhythm Section with Blake Lively. Thought
Hmm.
she gave a great performance in that movie. The movie had some issues, but she was particularly good. But sometimes those movies will operate in a heightened reality where you're like, okay, and then she goes to the CIA training, or she has to learn how to, and to me, I was just I kept thinking back to my aunt sitting in the car outside the guy's house and thinking, well, what would I do if it were me? What if the police didn't care? What if nobody cared? What if it was just, the apathy that's out there? And I wanted to do something about it. So I thought, how would one go about that? Is what are all the plotting steps you would have to take? But to see her take them, and to be as emotionally labile as she is, to be as on the edge as she is, and there's a certain point at which somebody said, because I remember she had told me this when we were working on it, you feel like if the wrong person gets in her way, she might kill them, some bystander, just because she's a bit unhinged. And I thought it was very interesting for me to watch that. She's very beautiful and graceful. And so putting all of that together, I thought made for some exciting cinema. And I think people have recognized her performance, and I think will continue to, because it really is quite a good one.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I want to. It sounds like you've invested a lot of your personal experience. There's a lot of heart and a lot of great ideas into this film, and I want to talk a bit about the critical response to it. Now, it hasn't been, it's been sort of mixed, mixed to not that not that great. Um, Sort of comparisons to movies like Traffic, and I've read some of the write-ups, and they're like, well, we've seen this story before. I don't quite feel like that's fair. I mean, Traffic was 20 years ago. A lot's changed in the drug war, so I think this is the kind of thing that needs an update with that human, touch to it. This doesn't feel uh, like something that was easy to do or something that was just done to put another movie out there. What's been your response to the critical reaction?
Well, look, I mean, it's been tough. Now it seems to be going in the right direction, which is good. But it it was a strange thing. I mean, I have to say, I do think, there's Armie Hammer is in the movie, and he's been having a lot of trouble in his life. So I think that impacted some of the coverage of the film, because, we had a lot of outlets that wanted to cover the film, and once his problems came to the fore, they didn't want to do it anymore because they said, well, we don't know where that goes. We were saying like, well, hey, what does that have to do with the movie? He's in 1/3 of the movie. We don't even know what he did or didn't do. And, there's still a whole movie about the opioid. Yeah, I know, but we can't do it. So whatever, you just have to accept that and keep rolling. We had sent this movie out, and got some advance reviews on it, and people were very positive. And then, some people were very positive in the beginning, but then there was a kind of torrent of hate, and a lot of it, I have to say, directed at Armie. But then, of course, it bled into the movie. And what about Gary Oldman? Didn't he beat a woman in the '90s? And so you're sort of like, hey, I'm like just a filmmaker, try and make an entertaining movie, and then hopefully also provoke some social debate about opioid prescribing and manufacturing. So I don't know. What do? You just roll with it. I mean, I think the good thing is the public really embraced the movie. We came out, we opened up even in the pandemic in 216 theaters. We were the #1 independent film at the box office, the #1 film on less than 900 or 1,000 screens. We were the #2 per screen in the country after Tom and Jerry, a huge movie. And then, so that was people seeking it out in the pandemic. And then we opened up, just a few weeks ago on demand, and we got to #1 on iTunes, and we stayed there for, 8 days or more, which is unheard of, for an independent film. And then we're still on top of Amazon. And so people are still discovering the movie. And I had that experience with Arbitrage, where we did a similar thing. We put it on VOD and in theaters at the same time, and it was a great success. We were the highest grossing film to ever do that. So, but I really took it as an endorsement by the public that the topic was interesting to them, because unlike with Netflix or Apple TV or whatever, where you pay a certain monthly fee and you get all you can eat, here it was people going into their wallet, taking out $6.99 and paying it to watch the movie. And by and large, the customer response has been pretty high, the ratings, so they seem to be in large numbers satisfied with the movie. And I really do look at all that stuff because as a filmmaker, I always want to improve. And if I'm doing it wrong, let me know where I've done it wrong and I got to try to do it better. But I think I put a lot of faith in the audience. I knew that we had something good here. I had tested it and shown it to audiences, and we always had very good response. And I brought in a lot of other filmmakers, from Mark Forrester to Tony Kaye to Taika Waititi to all these people coming in and helping me with cuts and editors. And so it really was a labor of love. I mean, we put time, energy, and money. I put my own money into these films, and so the cast worked for very little money, in freezing cold temperatures. So it was something we really believed in and still do believe in. And I think as it makes its way around the world, now the critics seem to be discovering it. Certainly, we've done some outreach for more interviews, and we're very thankful for people like yourself who shine a light on the film and on the topics that it covers. Because, like I said, there was that article I read 2 days ago that opioid deaths are the worst they've ever been. And of course, because the people are alone and isolated in the pandemic and depressed and drug seeking and all of that worst behavior is magnified. So what I really wanted to achieve with this film, beyond making an entertaining movie, was to advance the discussion of these topics. And it feels like that's happening. We just opened up in Australia. We were #1 there of new films in the theaters. We're in the Middle East now. We're going to continue to do Europe over the summer because the COVID still has everybody locked down. But we have Warner Brothers as our distributor there in the United Kingdom, and I think they have, a big plan for the movie. So we'll see. My main hope is that audiences continue to discover the film, and I think in time it's a film that will, its reputation will only grow as more and more people see it. I think that's another thing. I think not enough people had seen it. Normally, we would have had screenings and invited critics and press, and the pandemic really made all of that very difficult. So if you just get a little bit of negativity in an echo chamber, it can magnify. So I think it's going in the right direction. Let's say that.
An echo chamber is very interesting because something similar happened to Louis C.K.'s last film, I Love You, Daddy, from I think 4 years ago. That got a lot of festival buzz, a lot of positivity, and then the stories about him came out, and immediately it was persona non grata as far as films go. I watched it, I really dug it, but it's a movie you can't really talk about. Fortunately, I think Crisis is a film that, people, as you mentioned, are discovering it and can can talk about, regardless of what's going on with its star. I wanted to touch briefly on that. Looking at Arbitrage and this film, and even some of your earlier work, you have a unique nexus of actors who have gotten in some kind of trouble. You've worked with Nate Parker, Armie Hammer, Woody Allen. I'm curious, not the, not that.
They just canceled me.
Well, I'm sorry, yeah, and I'm not asking for any kind of like inside dirt or anything like that, even if you knew anything to divulge it. I'm just curious, these stories come out about a performer. Does that color the way that you approach Hollywood or actors in general, wondering like they have this public persona, they're great until a few years later something comes out and then they're so-called horrible people? Does that put you on any kind of guard, or like how does that work just for you as a person?
I don't have the solutions. There's a whole debate. Do you look at the art without the artist, or
Right.
how could you do that? You're supporting the artist. If the artist is an abuser, if they're accused, if they're convicted, if they're not. I have no answers to this. This is above my pay grade, quite honestly. Um, I'm like a simple filmmaker. I'm in the salt mines trying to find something entertaining, some type of universally relatable truth that makes us have a good time reflecting upon the inequities of human beings, the abuses of power, how we could try to be better people. All the classic themes. This is as much as I know. Someone once told me that the director, you're not a psychologist. You're not meant to understand and analyze your actors. You're meant to give them text. You're meant to give them direction. You're meant to give them rehearsal. You're meant to give them a sense that they are free to do their best work. So once we start bringing in all of the outside elements of what they did, do I run a background check on this actor? Did the studio do it? The whatever problems all these people have had, it's all long after I'm doing anything with them, right? So I don't know. I don't know where that's going to end up in culture. And I think, I don't know what do you do? Let's say someone was like a great act, you found out Jack Nicholson was actually a serial killer. What do you do? I don't know. Do you burn all his films? I think I don't think so. I don't think you burn anything. I think the films are there. There can be discussion around them. This was a tricky one. But I think we're coming out the other side, and that there's enough in this movie to serve viewers, that hopefully will stand the test of time and be appreciated in its own right, separate from any of the controversy around its cast.
Mm. And you were part of that cast for this one. Did you write the Stanley character as of yourself as the DEA agent? Did you have yourself in mind, or you're just like, I'm
I didn't.
not
I
finding who I
didn't
need?
actually. I didn't. I had always kind of wanted to do some acting, and then, but it was just as a silly idea in the back of my head. And then Lenny Kravitz, the musician, we had a mutual friend. He was doing a music video in LA, and he said, "Hey, I want a real director to play a crazy director directing me having a breakdown." My friend said, "Well, what about Nick?" So I said, "Do you want to do that?" I said, "I can't do it." He said, "Well, just do it. Okay. Well, it's Lenny. I love Lenny. All right." So then I did it, but we had a great time. And so then I got this crazy notion in my head, well, maybe I could do some acting. I have directed all these actors and stuff, so I know a little something about it. But then here, this really came about. We hadn't found anyone for this part. And then somebody said to me, like, well, where are we at with casting on that? And I don't know why it just came into my head. I said, well, I was thinking maybe I would do it, but only if it's cool with you guys. And then everybody was like, oh, great. Okay, so that's you're in, you wrote it, you know what to do. All right, so we got, so it was a good way to save some money too. We didn't have to pay, somebody. But it was a great experience. I loved it. And I think, I was just worried, would I embarrass the picture? So ultimately, you're the judge. I read one review that said I did everything terribly, including my acting. But then there were a few actually that said I was a nice presence on the screen, and perhaps we'd be seeing more of me. So in case anyone is listening, I'm certainly fielding offers. But no, but I thought, also because I'm kind of coming as the comic relief type character, and I felt like I had an energy that could support that.
Well, I agree, and particularly your
Thank you.
final scene in the film was, again, not to get anything away, but it was quite remarkable. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, I really wish I could give something away, but I want people to see this movie. Lastly, it was a number of years between Arbitrage and this film. Do you have something else gestating that you're going to start working on to make your next project? I mean, I know you're still trying to get the word about Crisis, and God love you for it. But what's next on the? You have some more irons in the fire?
Yeah, I have something I'm working on now. I'm really excited about it. We have to see if it comes together or not. It's another story of a dysfunctional system. This time it's about the military and about an extraordinary woman who was a pilot, a helicopter pilot. So we'll see. It's the thing that's frustrating about movies is it takes so much money to make them because you got to go get the helicopters and get this stuff. And so you just why can't we just do it cheap? But certain stories you can't. So it's a question of bringing together all of the elements of the cast, and I have a sensational actress. Hopefully we can make it work together. It's always finding the right partners to make these films. I mean, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to bring a movie together. It really is. Everyone is almost a miracle, and I feel very blessed to get to do it at all. So I have no complaints. But we'll see. We'll see with this one. I'm in it now, and I guess we'll find out where it shakes out.
Are you writing that by yourself as well?
No, it was a true story. It was the woman's autobiography, and so it's. I didn't write this one, but so that'll be an interesting experience, maybe.
Well, I almost guarantee it's going to be interesting because that sounds like a hell of a story. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me. Good luck with the film. For anyone out there
Thank
who's
you.
watching this and for some reason, well, we stayed away from spoilers. So hopefully, if you've heard about Crisis, you've heard about the controversy surrounding it, you're like, I don't know about it. Give it a shot. It really is something special that I feel like if this were to even have come out, several months later in the year, closer to award season, we'd be talking about it, and it'd be a very different conversation because um, the cast you've assembled is, incredible, and they all do great work. I know there's been some criticism of even Armie Hammer, his role, his part in the film. That's a little bit strange because I've not seen him in a role quite like this, and the cultural conversation is what it is, but I'd like to see more. But yeah,
Well, listen, I had a great time, and I'm really impressed by your collection of old technology there and this 1983 Betamax or whatever you got back there. I love it. You're keeping hope alive.
oh, well, thank you, and you're keeping me engrossed in the movies. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about the next one if we can.
I'm here.
And yeah, take it easy, man. Thank you very much. And
Okay, and
Crisis is now
everybody
on
can see
demand.
Crisis on demand anywhere. Find us at Crisis Movie on Instagram or Twitter or me. I always love hearing from people. I love hearing how people react to the movie, positive or negative. Let me know what you think. And thank you, Ian.
All right, Nick. Thank you very much. Take care.
Okay.
All right, bye.